We have made it now to the third question in Prima Secunda, which is the treatise on the last end. 5 total questions in this part of the Summa. And in this question, there are also 8 articles. You'll notice in this treatise, the questions tend to be pretty long because it's so fundamental to know what is our end? What is it exactly that we are trying to achieve? And what is it that God is directing us towards? And yesterday, in the second question, we talked about what makes men happy. And it was especially those things that make us somewhat happy here on earth, like, pleasures and fame and money and that kind of thing, but kind of scratching around the surface to try to get to what ultimately is our happiness. And I will say that in the 8th article of this question, St. Thomas Aquinas finally identifies exactly what it is that makes men happy, but you're going to have to wait and get through the first 7 articles to get to that 8th one. But this is interesting because in these 8 articles, you're going to see how St. Thomas Aquinas' mind works. He is zeroing in on the answer. And so every time he gets to another article, he's eliminating something, so to speak. Okay, and he's getting closer and closer to it. And then by the 8th article, finally you find out exactly what it is that is happiness for man. So we'll try to get through these as quickly as possible, but there are 8 articles, so it may take a little bit of time. Whether happiness is something uncreated. Is it created or uncreated? Thomas says our end is twofold. First, there is the thing itself which we desire to attain. Thus, for the miser, the end is money. And secondly, there is the attainment or possession, the use or enjoyment of the thing desired. Okay, so the thing that we desire and then the attainment of it is what he's saying here. Thus, we may say that the end of the miser is the possession of money, and the end of the intemperate man is to enjoy something pleasurable. In the first sense, then, man's last end is the uncreated good, namely God, who alone by his infinite goodness can perfectly satisfy man's will. But in the second way, man's last end is something created existing in him, okay? And this is nothing else than the attainment or the enjoyment of the last end. Now, the last end is called happiness. If therefore we consider man's happiness in its cause or object, then it is something uncreated. But if we consider it as the very essence of happiness, then it is something created. Okay, so I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but basically it has to do with our attainment of God, our desire for God, and then the achievement of getting what it is that we wanted in the first place. All right, is happiness an operation? Thomas is going to say yes, it is an operation. Insofar as man's happiness is something created, existing in him, we must needs say that it is an operation. Okay, it has to do with something that we do, something that we achieve, something that comes to us through our operation. For happiness is man's supreme perfection. Now each thing is perfect insofar as it is actual, since potentiality without act is imperfect. Consequently, happiness must consist in man's last act. But it is evident that operation is the last act of the operator, wherefore the philosopher calls it the second act. And it also highlights here, by the way, just as an aside, that everything that we do in our life is getting us towards that final ultimate goal of happiness, which really we're not going to be able to achieve until, God willing, we get to heaven. Because that which has a form can be potentially operating just as he who knows is potentially considering. And hence it is that in other things too, each one is said to be for its operation. Therefore, man's happiness must of necessity consist in an operation. Now, those first 2 articles are kind of challenging, but it's going to get a bit easier, not entirely easy, but it's going to get easier, okay? So now that we've established that happiness is an operation, right? You're going to notice now he starts zeroing in. So, okay, it's an operation. Is it operation of the sensitive part or of the intellective part only? And you might guess that he's going to go in favor of the intellective part. He says a thing may belong to happiness in three ways: essentially, antecedently, or consequently. Okay, now the operation of sense cannot belong to happiness essentially, for man's happiness consists essentially in his being united to the uncreated good, which is his last end, to which man cannot be united by an operation of his senses. Again, in like manner, man's happiness does not consist in goods of the body, which goods alone, however, we attain through the operation of the senses. So let me just tell you what he says here. He says that we can antecedently have some happiness through the senses because we can, have experience of power and, pleasures and money and fame and all that kind of stuff we talked about yesterday. And then subsequently in heaven, there's going to be an overpouring of the soul into the body. And so we will have pleasure. We'll have some kind of sensitive pleasure, but essentially the happiness that we experience is going to have to be in the intellective part of our soul. Okay, so now he says, okay, it's in the intellect. Now he wants to know, is it in it's the higher part of our soul. He says, so is it in the intellect or the will? Okay, because remember, the will is an intellectual desire. So the will is connected to the intellect. So is it the intellect or is it the will? And Thomas is going to say here, two things are needed for happiness. One, which is the essence of happiness. The other is, as it were, its proper accident. That is, the delight connected with it. I say, I like to point out that Thomas very rarely uses first person pronouns like I and we, but here he did. I say then that as to the very essence of happiness, it is impossible for it to consist in an act of the will. For it is evident that happiness is the attainment of the last end. But the attainment of the end does not consist in the very act of the will, for the will is directed to the end, both absent when it desires it and present when it is delighted by resting therein, right? So it's either desiring it through the will or enjoying it once it has been attained. And now it is evident that the desire itself of the end is not the attainment of the end, but is a movement towards the end, while delight comes to the will from the end being present. Okay, so you delight in something when the end is present, and not conversely is a thing made present by the fact that the will delights in it. Therefore, that the end be present to him who desires it must be due to something other than the act of the will, and it's going to be the intellect, right? Now he stops and he gives an example. He says, this is evidently the case in regard to sensible ends. For if the acquisition of money were through the act of the will, the covetous man would have it from the very moment that he wished for it, okay, when he desires it. But at the moment it is far from him, and he attains it by grasping it in his hand or in some like manner, and then he delights in the money that he got. And so it is with the intelligible end. For at first we desire to attain an intelligible end. We attain it through its being made present to us by an act of the intellect, and then we delight in it as the will rests in the end when attained. So therefore the essence of happiness consists in an act of the intellect, but the delight that results from happiness pertains to the will. Okay, I hope that made sense, because it's really kind of interesting. All right, so now he knows, he's established that it's in the intellect. Now he's saying, is it the speculative or the practical intellect? Speculative has to do with the contemplation of truth. Practical has to do with operations. So he says, happiness consists in an operation of the speculative rather than the practical intellect. This is evident for three reasons. First, because if man's happiness is an operation, it must needs be man's highest operation, which we've already established, right? Now, man's highest operation is that of the highest power in respect to the highest object, and his highest power is the intellect, whose highest object is the divine good, which is the object not of the practical, but of the speculative intellect. Remember, that's the contemplation of truth, right? Secondly, is evident from the fact that the contemplation is sought principally for its own sake, but the act of the practical intellect is not sought for its own sake, but for the sake of action, for the sake of operations, right? And these very actions are ordained to some end. Consequently, it is evident that the last end cannot consist in the active life which pertains to the practical intellect. And then thirdly, it is again evident from the fact that in the contemplative life, man has something in common with things above him, that is, with God and the angels, to whom he is made like by happiness. But in things pertaining to the active life, other animals also have something in common with man, although imperfectly. Okay, so he's saying we want to be more like the angels and God than the lower creatures, the with sensitive appetites, right? Therefore, the last and perfect happiness which we await in the life to come consists entirely in contemplation, but imperfect happiness, such as can be had here, consists first and principally in an operation of the practical intellect directing human actions and passions, right? All right, so number 6, does happiness consist in the consideration of speculative sciences? Now, a speculative science is going to be something that is a contemplation of the truth when it comes to science, okay? When you're not just experimenting individual things, but you're using science, even, physical science, in order to contemplate the truth. But what he's going to say here, and I'll just summarize it, is that he says you're still using the sensible part of yourself to look at things scientifically, because that's the scientific method, right? So anything that originates in the senses, even if it kicks up to something speculative or contemplation of the truth, still begins with the senses, so it's not going to be able to be that. All right, so now he's zeroing in even further. Does it consist in the knowledge of separate substances, namely the angels? So if we come to know the angels, which we really can't here below because they don't have bodies, and we come to know all things through our senses, would that be our happiness? And he says man's perfect happiness consists not in that which perfects the intellect by some participation, but in that which is so by its essence. Now it is evident that whatever is the perfection of a power, insofar as the proper formal object of that power belongs to it. Okay, now the proper object of the intellect is the true. Okay, that's what the intellect wants. Therefore, the contemplation of whatever has participated truth does not perfect the intellect with its final perfection. Since, therefore, the order of things is the same in being and in truth, whatever are beings by participation are true by participation. So in the end, he's going to say angels only participate in the truth. They are not, in their essence, the very truth of things. They're not like God, whose being is true and whose being is, goodness itself and perfection, right? So as you might guess, okay, we get to article number 8, and he says whether man's happiness consists in the vision of the divine essence. I told you there would be a payoff here. What is happiness? Happiness for the intellectual creature like us is a vision of the divine essence, right? Final and perfect happiness can consist in nothing else than the vision of the divine essence. To make this clear, 2 points must be observed. First, that man is not perfectly happy so long as something remains for him to desire and seek. Secondly, that the perfection of any power is determined by the nature of its object. Now, the object of the intellect is what a thing is. Okay, the essence. The essence of a thing. Wherefore, the intellect attains perfection insofar as it knows the essence of a thing. If therefore an intellect knows the essence of some effect, wherefore it is not possible to know the essence of the cause, that is, to know the cause what it is, that intellect cannot be said to reach that cause simply, although it may be able to gather from the effect the knowledge of that which the cause is. This goes back to remember can we prove that God exists? And Thomas talks about these a posteriori demonstrations where we look out at the world and we see that it's beautiful, and then we're curious, we wonder about the cause, and that can bring us to at least a belief that God exists because we see all of his effects. So that he's getting back to that now. Consequently, when a man knows an effect and knows that it has a cause, there naturally remains in the man the desire to know about the cause, what it is. And this desire is one of wonder and causes inquiry, as is stated at the beginning of metaphysics, by Aristotle. For instance, if a man, knowing the eclipse of the sun, consider that it must be due to some cause, and know not what that cause is, he wonders about it, and from wondering proceeds to inquire. Nor does this inquiry cease until he arrives at a knowledge of the essence of the cause. So we're constantly wondering, what is the cause of all these wonderful things that we experience every day, right? Remember, knowledge is conformity of our mind to the world. And as we conform our mind to the world, we wonder and we have awe and we have desire to know what that cause is. All right, last paragraph here. If therefore the human intellect, knowing the essence of some created effect, knows no more of God than that he is, that he exists, the perfection of that intellect does not yet reach simply to the first cause, but there remains in it the natural desire to seek the cause. Wherefore it is not yet perfectly happy. Consequently, for perfect happiness, the intellect needs to reach the very essence of the first cause, and thus it will have its perfection through union with God as with that object in which alone man's happiness consists. So I know this has been a long question, 8 articles, but what he's getting at here is, remember when we first said that man can know that God exists, but just to know that God exists is not being united to God. So now he's saying that happiness is union with God. It's contemplation of God, and it's attaining our final end by knowing him, which really we're not ever going to be able to fully enjoy until the beatific vision in heaven. Well, thank you for hanging with me. This has been question 3 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologia, and we'll get to our last 2 questions of this treatise tomorrow and the day after. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. God bless you. Thanks for watching.